twice in person. Once I was in the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem, and I had gone there for some social event, and he had been there to make some sort of an appearance. And we both happened to be on parallel lines at the coat check counter. And I looked over, and I did like that. Not because I knew who he was, to be honest with you, but he was the largest man I had ever seen. And I'm not a little person, but I just, like one of his fingers made two of mine. He had hands that were so enormous. His arms, his density, his mass was so over his head, just a huge man. And I just said, wow. Yeah.
I want to backtrack for a minute because I want people to know who you are in the film. Tell me how long you've been doing this kind of work, print and television.
Well, I started my career in Harlem radio at radio station WLIB, and that was in the mid-'60s, shortly after the assassination of Malcolm. And then I was hired at Channel 7 in 1967, and I nailed my job down there covering the upheavals in Newark, that they called riots, but I prefer to call them upheavals or uprisings. And the following year, 1967, Dr. King was assassinated, and a collective mantle of guilt fell over many areas of American society, including media. And they decided to do that which they had never done before, and that was to begin to not only hire a few black people, but also to have black programming. And so in the local area, every station came up with a black program, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. And the Channel 7 version was Like It Is. And I had been there a year. I was doing weekend anchor work. I was doing street reporting. But when Like It Is came along, I was very excited about it because it presented an opportunity to be involved with a production unit that I could have some say in, although I was not producer at the time. I was just co-host. The original host was Robert Hooks, the actor. And the following year, he got an offer to do some obscure television series called NYPD. And he left and recommended that I, become the host. Up until then, I'd been his sort of alter ego, and I would do street field reports and stuff. And so very reluctantly, and it's hard to believe, but I was not really anxious to be the host, but I did. And then in 1975, I became the producer. And then that's when it began to come together, a number of forces: my disciplines as a reporter, my experience as a Harlemite, and the continuing intellectual development about our people, living in Harlem, working in Harlem, hearing the leaders who were coming through, the people who were telling me not only about what was happening today, but how they got to be that way, an education that I had never gotten in school. So all these things began to come together, and I infused
people in the media. Could you talk briefly about some of the perceptions of black point of view and white point of view of individuals, and then sort of segue that into ropes, and we'll go into different stages because I'm sure that it varied at different times.
Well, in my experience in media, I have seen that even with the presence of black people as reporters and doing anchor work, final decisions are still in the hands of people who are neither black, brown, red, or yellow. And many people of color getting jobs, and this is a first-generation experience for us, because up until then, we were working in black radio. That was it. So to move into the big time and start making some serious money, This was something that was new to us, and it was very, the few of us who got in. So it was very exciting, and it was something that nobody wanted to relinquish. And when you get into a job environment such as the big time, be it broadcast or other, you find out very quickly what the pace is, what the rhythm, and what the ethos is. And you either fold into it and become a part of it and, the whole thought process, or you don't. So I think that, and that's a truncated way of answering your question by saying that I saw, even with the presence of black people, this prevailing control of imagery, all right? And many blacks, as I said, found it very difficult to go against that because they felt, and rightly so, that it might injure their career, their future.
Right. Now, editorially, how does that play out? I mean, let's take, for example, Paul Robeson, let's say during his later years, let's say.
Yes.
Which is when we sort of media,
Mm-hmm.
How did the black press treat him differently from the white press, and how did you perceive that to be?
Substantially. The black press really rose to his defense, gave him a platform, allowed him to speak up, gave him editorial support, gave him repertorial support, gave him the kind of coverage that he wasn't getting from the white press. Paul Robeson caught it, so to speak, because he was taking America to task. And again, it's a thing. You're not supposed to do that if you have made it. And he had made it. And so he was viewed by many, including the lions in media, as being an ingrate. He wasn't grateful for what had happened. And on top of that, he was talking in an era where there was McCarthyism and there was concern about communism, and he didn't sectarianize his condemnation of racism. He saw it as a global phenomena. He had been to England, where he really began his career on the stage in major proportions, doing Othello. And he was exposed to some very important scholars in England and some leaders, Kenyatta and Nkrumah, and many, many others. And that began to influence his thinking. And what they were telling him, what he was learning, was the globalness of racism and colonialism and oppression. And so when he began to speak up, he began to threaten, or at least many power institutions viewed it as a threat to their agenda, their plans, what they had in mind for globalization, which of course is right in our laps today. And he was an interventionist. He was an obstructionist. He was telling the world from the concert stage about this as he perceived as an evil. And, of course, that's when he really began to catch it.
You know a lot about him. In the beginning of his cultural career as a concert singer,
yes,
he seemed to get a lot of good press, even in the white press. I mean, is that a correct statement? I mean, how did that play?
Yeah, I mean, there are the newspaper headlines of him and his prowess at Rutgers. There was always an interesting spin they took, this dark presence that thundered down, and it was very interesting how he was depicted. But nonetheless, he was viewed. There was really no option, because there he was, and he was mowing everybody down as a great athlete. Then when he started to do spirituals, that was okay. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child and water boy, who could argue with that? It was only when he began a little later on to broaden his thesis and began to take those spirituals and say, now this was just not some, moaning and complaining people. These were people who were using their cultural product as a signature for struggle and resistance, and he began to talk about that. That's when it became difficult. So in answer to your question, I think at first he was a darling. He was a darling. He appeared on radio programs. He did a program. There was a still photograph of him with Raymond Massey, the actor, and he was very, very well received. There was a huge birthday party in his honor at a regiment armory in New York City, and everybody was there. Jimmy Durante and a whole lot of people were there. He was really looked up to, and people called him a credit to his race, and it was at that event that Mary McLeod Bethune called him the tallest tree in our forest. Beautiful. So from the jump, as we say in Harlem, he was viewed as okay. He was fine.
And I suppose the black press was happy because he was doing, he was.
Well, yes, because not only was he a star performer, but his powers of articulation. He was such a presence. When that man walked out on the stage, I remember living in Harlem, and my father, who's Jamaican, and he and my mother, who's also Jamaican, went down to Broadway to see Othello. And coming from a Jamaican upbringing, he knew his Englishness. He knew the Bible. He knew the English literary lions, and he knew his Shakespeare backwards and forwards. So when he went down there and saw that, when he came back, he couldn't speak. He was absolutely overwhelmed. He said he'd never seen a man with that voice and with the diction. He won the Diction Award, and that's something that is not often conferred on an actor. My father was blown away. I remember him, just saying he'd never been through anything like that. And to hear my father say that, because my father was some kind of man. So for him to say that about another man, the man is bad, okay, as we say.
Right. What was, I know that there was some controversy when he began to add European songs to his repertoire. And I know in the black press, there was a bit of a discussion. Did you, in your research, did you peep that? And did you...
Well, I think at first, I'm not too conversant about the white folk, inclusion in his presentation. But I know that as he began to talk about better treatment for black people and talk about socialistic approaches to government and society, that's when he began to catch it. There were some movies that he did that civil rights organizations were troubled by. He did some movies and they thought he was a little... And he himself agreed. And Sanders of the River, he picketed, and he was the star of the movie.
Yeah, what was interesting to me is that as you read the black press, there's a wide range of opinion in it about different things that he did. We did notice that when he added European songs, some people said, "Well, why are you abandoning us?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the white press said, "Oh, well, he's broadening. He's more universal."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And let me ask you. I think we know the answer, but I want to hear you say it. Why do you think there's these two approaches to this one person and to this one phenomenon, Robeson? Because consistently, up to the HUAC, and then it kind of gets a little fuzzy, there are really two distinct approaches in the press about this guy.
From the white press and from
the black press. Why?
Well, we didn't have many heroes then. We had Joe Louis. We didn't have Jackie Robinson yet. Lena Horne was still, maturing as a presence on the stage. Ethel Waters, Rochester, a few things, but nothing like Paul. So we were very proud of this man. Just his presence again. He had an awesome presence. And he was a source of great pride. And I think that up until that point of which you speak, I think that white people were glad to see this kind of a person. You know, he didn't raise a hue and cry about not being on Walter Camp's All-America, about being excluded in the Hall of Fame. You know, there were only 10 people mentioned on the starting team of the All-America when he won it. He didn't jump up and down about that. He was sort of quiet when he finished law school at Columbia, and he went to that law firm in Wall Street, and the secretary didn't take dictation. He didn't jump up and down and raise a stink. He just moved into another pursuit. So he was not a rabble-rouser per se then. So I think up until a certain point, he was very, very comfortable. You know, he was a credit to his race. You know, he was something that everybody could be very proud of, including white America. He didn't complain a lot about performing in under-segregated conditions at first. But, you know, Paul Robeson, in my humble opinion, which is very humble and very limited, I would say that he did not start his career at 90 miles an hour. It picked up momentum. The glorious thing about this man is that as he met more resistance, instead of decelerating, he accelerated.
Yeah, that's a good. We don't have that. That's a good analysis of his being a good guy until a certain point. Yeah. I'll tell you that the thing that. Are you okay? The thing that I notice also is once you get black players involved in trying to rein him in, like Jackie Robinson for a minute, like the NAACP, then it really gets complicated. You know, people. So now, from a media point of view, how does that play out? I mean, how did the black press deal with Jackie Robinson when he, you know, said, "I thought that what Mr. Robeson said was silly," and what did the white press say, or how did they both react to that?
Well, you know, I've looked at that clip of Jackie Robinson's statement. I'm not clear whether he volunteered or whether somebody asked him to volunteer. Somebody told him to volunteer. But he had just broken in, and he himself was a star. Anyhow, he and Rachel ended up in Washington. But the clip shows him saying, if this is what he really said, and then there's a cutaway to a listener, and then it comes back and he says, well, it sounds pretty silly to me. I've never seen, and you and I deal with this business called editing, I've never seen the straight cut. And so it may be that what Jackie really said is not what we heard him say. You know, editors have a way of doing those things.
No.
And so it may not be true. But I do know that Jackie, whatever he did say, it was not laudatory of Paul. It did differ. But I think he had more to say about the discussion because Jackie was no lightweight. He was an intellectually competent person, more than the average. And so I don't think he was an ill-considered man. And I think that while he may have differed with Paul Robeson, I think he had another context that was lifted out. Now, sometimes that kind of editing is done in the interest of time. And then sometimes it isn't.
Nicely said. What? How did that play out? I mean, how did the black press deal with Jackie, one of our heroes, jacking up another of our heroes? I mean, how did that play out there?
I think that people really rose to Paul Robeson's defense. It wasn't the first time. I mean, Don Newcomb, soon after, had that legendary confrontation in the Red Rooster, and black people rose to Paul's defense when Newcomb threatened him physically. And you know the story that Jimmy Hicks told. I'm not aware that of reading any editorials in the black press castigating Jack, because you have to remember at the time McCarthyism had everybody backed up. Now we can look at it for what it was, but in those days, I mean, being called a communist was really very serious, and even black people in the black community were afraid of it. Du Bois had been pillaged by this label, and a lot of people viewed, in our community, viewed communism as something, commensurate with leprosy and, whatever. It was bad to be a communist. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, that was good. In terms of Paul's overseas activities, like becoming a star in England, especially his Spanish Civil War stuff in the late 30s, did the black press really give that any play, or, once he was out of the country, they just forgot about him?
Well, I can tell you, I have pursued our collective story like a Trappist monk, really. This is my life story. And I've pursued Paul Robeson in particular, his story. And I've done many documentaries on him. 99% of the footage has come from overseas. Paul Robeson himself said that he has never appeared on American television as an artist. There's, I think, one clip of him coming out of the State Department when he won his passport back. But I have seldom seen any other footage of Paul Robeson. So the attention that he got by the media was overseas, where he was lionized. But over here, there was nothing. It's hard to believe, but he was never invited to appear on television. And even Eleanor Roosevelt, as you know, had a radio show, and she canceled her invitation to him. So I think that in our collective ignorance about socialism, about communism, in the heat of the moment, and I have to keep emphasizing this because after the fact, it's always easier to look. Monday morning, it's always easier to look at the play that didn't go right. But when you're in the middle of it, those are very confusing times for us. We didn't know much about our history. We didn't know much about globalization. We didn't know much about colonialism. We were embarrassed about slavery. We were embarrassed about racism. We got around these things. We didn't confront it. And communism was something that we knew, we were told very clearly, that we had to avoid. We weren't working on Madison Avenue. We were not, in media. We were outsiders. And so what Master said, we went along with. And if Master said that communism was wrong, then communism was wrong. So when somebody like Paul Robeson came along with a whole different commentary, it was intimidating. Now, it would be comfortable, perhaps, for me to say that that isn't the case. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of us ran scatter from Paul when he was taking these stands and talking about socialism and Russia.
Well, nobody has said it as clearly as that. People have danced around that issue.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, I think the press seems to reflect that.
Yeah.
Either by ignoring them or just...
Yeah.
Which is why, I guess, is one of the reasons why he had to do his own book, stuff like that.
That's why he had to... Exactly. Here I stand. I mean, he found it necessary to really make his case for himself because he found that he really wasn't getting it. I don't think that our motives were the same as the white media. White media is really business focused at its base. And so many of the editorial postures that you see that media takes, in my opinion, is not immune and is not apart from business and political concerns. It's funny I should say this in these times.
Do you think even during the height of the the Cold War and stuff, when they were just, I've read some white editorials, they were just bitter against this guy, hard. Now, it seemed to go beyond just business. It seemed to be highly personal, it seemed to me. Do you think that there was an element of slapping down an unruly slave type, somebody?
He was a disappointment. It was like, how could you? After all we've done, as close as we've been, we've rolled around, in the bed together. How could you get up the next morning and say that about me? How could you say that? So there was a wounding process, like Jimmy Baldwin said, like wounded lovers, the French and the Algerians. How could you dare have an uprising as close as we've been? And so Paul, who had been so closely embraced by Uncle Sam, all of a sudden he turned on them. And so there was great disappointment, great pain, which in many instances turned to anger, of course. Not so much because he was criticizing racism, but he began to talk about colonialism. He began to stand up for the colonial peoples of the world and the struggles in Africa. And at that point, there was great concern because Paul Robeson, his whole aura and all of his commentary began to really be loud and clear at the time when Congo was in flux and Ghana had just, risen up, and there was fervor. In the Caribbean, there were uprisings. And, there was some business interests that really didn't want to hear that. So when Paul Robeson started talking about that, as visible as he was, there was not only a hurt, but there was also an anger because you're now talking in a way that injures my wallet.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good analogy of the lover.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. Because they really did get into him, and then they just... I noticed it was like an invective of some of the stuff that they were on during the Cold War. I mean, it wasn't just about business. It was something personal, I always thought.
Yeah, and the irony is that Uncle Sam and Russia were in bed together during World War II. They were kith and kin. So at some point when Paul began to visit Russia and whatnot and performed there, not an eyebrow was raised. But then after the Germans were put out of commission and the war was over, then there became a squabble over the spoils. And that's really when it hit the fan. And the major power outside of Uncle Sam was Russia, because the European nations had become depleted and ravaged by bombings and the whole war campaign. Uncle Sam was immaculate. No bombs had landed here. And so everything was intact here in this country. And the only thing that opposed Uncle Sam's interest was the Soviet Union. And that's when they got it on.
Are you aware of any black press element or a black press writer or newspaper that dealt with these issues the way you just ran it down? Are you aware of any? I mean, I'm wondering if the Carl Rowan, remember when he went to his defense, there was an article in 51, I think it was. I think I got it here. It was in 51 in Ebony, as Paul Robeson betrayed the Negro, and basically said, no, he's good. And I don't know if you know about that one.
No, I didn't see that article. But I think, though, that at that era, our focus was still civil rights and civil inequity. And Paul had taken it to another level, and I don't think many of us were on that level, with the exception of Du Bois. Du Bois was right out there, and he...
in terms of analyzing the white press, when would you say, I know you can't give dates, but when would you say, in terms of his whole career, when they began to turn on him?
I think when he made a deliberate move to partition audiences up front for poor. The poor people he wanted to have seated up front at reduced prices, and have the wealthy people sit further back. And he would say so from the concert stage. It was a precondition for his contract. He went out of his way. And that was the signal, I believe, that he really had made a decision as to what kind of a performer he really wanted to be and was going to be, that he was going to use his instrument as a weapon for change and for confrontation with wrong. I think that that was a clear signal. The Spanish Civil War with the Loyalists, yeah, I think that that was also. But then, he was all over the place. I mean, he was involved with anti-lynching, and that may have also put people off because he confronted Truman. They picketed the White House, and a delegation of picketers went into the White House and talked with Mr. Truman. And the president said that he was not prepared to do anything at the time. And Robeson said, and it's a quote, "If you don't do something about lynching, we will." Well, now, you don't talk like that, as an entertainer. I mean, who are you? And so a lot of people began to feel that he was moving out of his britches, that there was a stereotype role for black and white artists. He's supposed to play ball, even with the HUAC hearings, mind you. There was an actor, a grade B actor, I can't recall his first name. I think his last name was Reagan. He didn't hesitate to badmouth and accuse some of his fellow actors as being communists. Robert Taylor, he also, John Wayne, a lot of people really turned on their, not because they were really concerned about the commun, but because they felt it expedient for their careers. They had been given they had gotten some sort of pressure, and they caved in. And so here comes Paul Robeson, who, when he was invited to testify, he didn't back down. I mean, he opened fire on them. So I think I'm skidding around the place because it's difficult to really pinpoint. There's not a day or a demonstration or a particular hinge. I wish that I could identify that, but I'm not able to. But I think also his involvement with Einstein and going over to the Paris Peace Conference at the behest of Du Bois, his challenging baseball owners about opening up the major leagues. All this happened in the same era of the 40s, around there. And he was out of line. He was definitely out of line. And even though the game has changed a little bit, it's still pretty much the same.
I had another question off that, but let me just go to this. What is often said is that from that time that you just mentioned to almost now, 100 years, since his birthday, centennial, that essentially he was like written out of history deliberately. I mean, well, general history, not our history. But would you say that the black press has gone along with that, or do you think that they were one of the people you can kind of point to that kind of kept his somewhat limited reputation? I mean, how would you place that?
Oh, no, they began to cover him. They gave him a good editorial run on what he said to HUAC. They ran his comments in full. They began to cover him at churches, which was his only venue to perform when everything else was closed to him. The black press, I believe, really rose to his defense. Mind you, blacks in white media didn't exist, so black journalists were working for black papers, and they went after Paul and applauded him and supported him, with few exceptions.
How do you? What's your take on the fact that 30s and early 40s he was really getting socialistic? He was, moving. He was, Spain, as you mentioned, and then in World War II he becomes like a Bond seller. I mean, he appears with stars. He's very patriotic. I mean, he redefines patriotism a little bit, and he was considered good. Now, how does that, media-wise, how do you become an enemy of the state and then become a good guy? How does that work in media terms?
Well, during the American Revolution, many slaves fought with the colonies against the crown, thinking that if they did that, they would win their freedom. And the British troops, when they found that out, they began to hit on the slaves to come and fight with them against the colonies. It happened in World War I, and it happened in World War II. Many felt that if we put our shoulder to the grindstone and fought fascism, then America, which was essentially misguided, not evil, not inherently corrupt, irreversibly. We just thought, and I really have to qualify that because I can't really make that broader statement. It's not fair. But I think that many of us felt that the United States was misguided, and that if only it was shown the error of its ways, that it would turn around and say, "I'm sorry. How could I have done it? Of course, we want you to be equal, and respected in the society." And so it was that spirit that I think caused a lot of us to be champions. Joe Louis did boxing exhibitions, and a lot of people black people got involved in the war effort. And of course, Paul Robeson became a champion seller of war bonds because he really felt, as I said, so many felt, that if we really contributed to defeating the Axis, that justice would then turn around and be meted down to us.
And the media seems to have reflected that. I mean, both white and black media.
Oh, yes. Remember Joe Louis, when he was at a war rally at Madison Square Garden, he said, "We're going to win because we're on God's side." Place exploded. Jimmy Cannon said he's a credit to his race. Familiar? All of a sudden, black people who would say that were really adored. And I'm talking now in hindsight and retrospect. We didn't know then what we know now about America. In our history books, we didn't know what America was really about. We didn't know what the colonies were about. We didn't understand colonial America. We didn't understand the whole formulation of this country. We sure didn't learn it in schools, be they white journalists or black journalists. We ain't learning it today in plain bad English. We don't learn anything at all about our history. Journalists don't have to learn anything about African history, and yet they, go around the world and cover African events without knowing how things came to be that way. And it was much worse then. So I think that was reflected in the attitudes of the media, who went through the same schooling that we all did.
Good. Okay. Two things.
Can I have some gin?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Robeson's private life was, quite filled with ladies. And it was known, but it was never really reported. In the black press, it was more reported than the white press. I mean, I've seen articles. Where's Paul? He's living in a hotel as he's uptown, that kind of stuff. Now, what's your take on that? I mean, the whole thing now of private life versus public life is very much in the news line. It's in the headline.
You noticed that.
A little bit. But I mean, it was actually, you could read more about it in the black press, especially during his early stardom, celebrity days, than in the white press. And, what's your take on that?
Well, I think that if you look at Paul Robeson and you hear his voice, it's not difficult to believe the argument that women threw themselves at him. I'm sure he fought valiantly against the onslaught. And with all due respect to this man, I think he could have been much worse than whatever it turned out to be. We're all fresh out of stones, and it wouldn't be right for me to even begin to really find fault with his behavior. But did the black media get into it? It never took the salacious turn tone that we look at today. It never got into that. It might have been who he was seen with or where he wasn't, and maybe gossipy kind of stuff, but nothing. But I think that Paul was a very attractive man. I know. I mean, look at this man. He was absolutely magnificent. Sculptors sought him out to do his physique and all of that stuff. His voice, he's just overwhelming. And so women, there's a story about his involvement with one of his co-stars in Othello. Yeah. So, and I don't think that he was always the aggressor. I'm sure that he wasn't. I think that he was, as we call, hit on. You know.
Now we have a woman in London who just, on camera just said he was big, he was black, and I loved him. I mean, she just went off, so. But what was interesting is, I would have thought that that's an area that white journalists might have gone to just because there's that whole, it's a way to undercut, reduce him to a sexual object. But they didn't do that. And I was wondering if you had any reason why they had.
No, I don't. It's very interesting, though.
They were kind of respectful in it until, you're right, until you started talking about the bad things.
Although there was a big to-do about Othello on Broadway. Big to-do, because he put his hands on this woman and killed her on stage, and they kissed and all of that stuff. So there was a big to-do about the onstage. There was not a lot of coverage about the offstage relationship. But even the onstage thing, you just didn't do that. I mean, years later, Harry Belafonte did a TV special with, I think it was Julie Andrews, and she put her hand on his elbow, just touched his elbow, and the station that aired it went ballistic. So for him to be so magnificent, so appealing, and to be putting his hands on this woman on stage and killing her every night, that was really difficult.
Okay, you basically answered all my questions. I just want to get three questions. What was your take on the white media when the white media's interpretation when he got his passport back, and did it differ from the black press?
Yeah, he still carried the commie label. There's the one clip that I've ever seen taken of Paul by American newsreel was outside of the State Department. He's standing there with Lloyd Brown. And you can see that he was being baited by some reporters about when he was talking about friendship with the Soviet peoples and whatnot. And he said, yes, that's right. He was really... so I think that he was attacked right up to the bitter end on this whole thing about his being a commie lover and all of that. Even though he was successful in court, I don't think he ever escaped that. He was able to work again and whatnot, but he never was really let off the hook for having that stand. And I must say that, and if I can just throw this in, I think one of the hallmarks of this man's remarkable story, few of us can really hope to embody the broad array of talents that this man had. But I think it's all within us to have the kind of testicularity to be able to stand up for what you believe in, no matter what the price. This is a day of pragmatism, and it's a tragic era that we're in. Paul Robeson is a beacon in that he really set an example that no matter what the price, some ethic is worth standing and paying the price for. And I think that's something that we could all benefit by. It's tough because money is God here in this environment in these times. And money is definitely connected to the kind of person you are. Paul Robeson walked away from that and made a deliberate choice. It wasn't an artistic choice. It was a human choice that he made. And that is what really is the hallmark of his life. And if our young people could only hear that story of a man who had it all and would not undress. He kept his ethical garments on. He wouldn't take his clothes off for anybody. That's something I think we could all benefit from. But I digress. I'm sorry. But
I like testicularity. That's a great. That's a great.
Well,
word. That's a great word.
I'm going to hear it from now.
The Wallace campaign. I don't know how much you know about that one.
Some.
Yeah.
And Ben Davis also.
Yeah, that whole era was kind of strange because it didn't seem to break down in black or white per se. I mean,
That's right.
Now what role did the black press play in that? I mean, the fact that he was pushing for a white guy, did they go, hey, what are you doing? I mean, how did that?
Well, I mean, there was great optimism. There was a labor movement in this country that had really gathered momentum. The civil rights movement was beginning to germinate. There was a whole Wendell Willkie and his one world philosophy. There was a beginning of a change in this country to really try to refashion a more democratic environment. And Paul Robeson really got on the bandwagon in support of Mr. Wallace because he really and truly believed that his philosophy was something that would really benefit America. He caught it. And he got a pinko label on him even more than it already had been.
How did the press thing play out, though? Are you aware of that? I mean,
you mean as far as a black man campaigning for a white man?
Yeah. In the black press, for example. What did they...
I mean, there was no other option. I mean, who else are you going to campaign for? There ain't no black candidates in those days. So it was a matter of campaigning for the best of the lot, you know. As I see it, there was no... What were the options for black people? So it wasn't so bizarre unto itself for a black man to be supporting a white candidate, but it was the political, belief that was really called into question.
And from your readings, did the black press pretty much call it that way? I mean, analyze it that way?
I can't, in all honesty, Saint, I really don't want to half-step because this man's story is too important, and I have too much respect for it to really hypothesize where I'm not clear.
Yeah, I have to go back on that because I was trying to figure out. I mean, I know that a lot of the urban papers supported Robeson and they reported on Robeson, but whether they went with him all the way to Wallace, I don't know. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Wallace was a real liberal. I mean, he had very liberal policies that even went beyond socialism. He embraced Robeson physically, in public. I mean, he welcomed his support, and it was more bizarre for a white man to accept such strong, visible support from a black person. That was really incredulous because blacks, we were sort of in the background. But he said, yes, Paul, come, and stand up for me. And there's that picture of the two of them, embracing. And that was unheard of. You didn't see too much of that.
Yeah. Finally, what's been, in more contemporary times, what has been the reaction of the public to your films on Robeson? I mean, what are the things that have struck you about that? I mean, did people say, oh, I knew about him, or oh, I didn't know about him, or... I mean, did you get jammed for trying to do it? And what was the overall? And I've seen two that you've done.
Well, all roads lead to Paul Jr. I wanted to do the story, and I met Paul Jr., and we struck up a friendship, which survives to this day. I view Paul Jr. as an extraordinary man because he has chosen not to exploit, but to advance his father's story. And I have the deepest respect for him. It's not been a perfect road, but then who can say anything? But as far as his integrity, I was there from the beginning when the Paul Robeson Archives was founded on 57th Street across from Carnegie Hall, and I watched him wading through those papers and all of that stuff. He guided me. So I think that he has to be given credit. He gave me insights that I didn't have. He led me to sources overseas of footage. He motivated me to move on my own to get more footage about this man. He gave me audio of his father's performances, and he gave me an education that is invaluable to me. Now, in answer to your question about what was the audience reaction, on a number of levels, I got some people who had been sort of laid back, had been sort of cowed by the McCarthy era and all of that, and they just, laid out. But they came forward. The old soldiers came out and said, how good it was to see Paul again. And there were some very emotional responses. Young people, I show them, we have interns who work here at Like It Is, and I make sure that they see the tallest tree. They didn't even know the man lived. And they are angry. They're angry that they didn't know, about him because he was so huge. It's like saying, you didn't know there was a pyramid, how could you not know that? And if you don't know that, why didn't I know that there was a pyramid or there were pyramids? And this man was bigger than a pyramid. And most of our young people to this day do not know his story. And when you tell them the story of Paul Robeson, if you're able to do it, and that takes some doing because there's so many dimensions to this man, but if you tell the story, even in cursory terms, I think you'll be met by anger on the part of young people because they feel that they've been had, which indeed they have. They've been had.
But so the anger...
Oh, yes. Deep anger that they didn't know that this larger person was never mentioned in school, ever, by any teacher in sociology, history, government, whatever it is. It was never, they don't know that he existed. And so to tell them about that really has made some of them quite angry. Now, that's not the singular response.
Right.
But it speaks volumes to them about what we try to teach them here as interns, about how perspective is all important in reporting and in journalism and in writing. And it's not so much what you say as it is what you don't say. It's not that you lie about somebody or some people. It's just what you don't say, what you leave out, And so they've just left out this mountain of a man, and they feel it's wrong. Because he was a forerunner to the civil rights movement, And if they don't know about him, then who else don't I know about? W.E.B. Du Bois, who was he? And it puts them on a whole, mission to find out more about these missing major steps in history. Paul Robeson is so large. I was angry about the treatment of the American media against this man. I'm still angry.
So in reflecting about the role of the press, therefore, hearing you talk now, the one thing that you said that strikes me is that you said it's very much a business, and therefore, if he's not good for business, then he doesn't get in.
Yes. Yes.
But it also seems to me that it's a little more than that. You know what I mean? Because you can always spin, especially if he's dead, you can spin people around and make him kind of less threatening.
Right.
But they have really just jammed him pretty consistently. So I'm wondering, sort of an abstract question, but why does the white media just basically still try to ignore him and what he represents? And to a lesser extent, Bloods tend not to do that either. I mean, they don't go out of their way either. So what does that say to you as a long-time participant in media?
It's an abscess that perpetuates itself. If you absent a certain facet of history, you don't have to. After a while, it has its own momentum. So the educational system, as it was sculpted, excluded a certain kind of person or made a certain kind of rebel to injustice, a deranged person, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, even Douglas. All these people were viewed as, extremists and whatnot, Malcolm X later on and whatnot. But I'm saying that if you begin to paint these rebels as deranged people, then after a while, you don't have to do it deliberately anymore. That people will just, the whole educational system, without even thinking about it, will just hurdle certain avenues. I don't think that people sit down in smoke-filled rooms and say, we're not going to put him in the curriculum and we're not going to. It's just instinctive. I never thought of that. It's not, you know what I'm saying? So now I think today there's no real improvement. I don't think that there's much that's being taught about Paul Robeson today or what that was all about. What was he really talking about? What was he really what was he struggling against? Where does Paul Robeson's stand fit in with sweatshops today? Where does what he was talking about fit into the struggle in South Africa? What is the connection of what happened in Jamaica? Much less here in this country. So I think that if you set the scenario well, the scenario will just act out on its own and perpetuate itself. If you tell a light-skinned black person that they're good-looking, if they have gray eyes and straight hair, after a while they'll believe it, and their children will believe it, and after a while you'll have a community of people who will think that the best-looking people are those with blow hair and nice features and yellow. And ugliness is thick lips. You just can't think of somebody ugly, as we would say. Features like Mary McLeod Bethune or Louis Armstrong. We've been taught that way. And what I'm trying to say in a feeble way is that we were just nurtured to really hurdle that, both blacks and whites in this country, to just hurdle a certain kind of beauty. I don't know if I've said that well.
That was good. We got to cut. Also, it's what you said. You've got a thing on your desk.
Oh yes, Carter G. Woodson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we still okay. Good. We got it. Okay. I always get the other. Is there anything that you want to say? Yes.
I think that it's not revelatory to say that black men are singled out as a target. Always have always been feared because of our physical strength and whatnot. And the outgrowth of that, one of the outgrowths, is that it's very difficult for us as black men to really define ourselves, to have a compass and a clock and a trajectory in life. It's very difficult to be men. It's difficult to be protective of our family and our women. It's difficult for us to protect ourselves. And income has nothing to do with it. I'm speaking now, about myself. I just think that it is very, very difficult for us to define ourselves. And I think that Paul Robeson What is missing in this story, and is not really focused on a lot, is the tremendous pressure that he was subjected to within his social milieu, within his family perhaps, about his manhood, because he paid a tremendous price in his personal relationships to pursue his career and to pursue his political bent. You know, the demands that were made on him, the challenges that were made. He was a well-considered man, and he would think about things, and he was constantly being challenged and questioned and not given the kind of respect, even when he was a star, that he was deserving of. And I think that this is something that all black men are subjected to. And it is amazing that Paul Robeson lasted as long as he did and was as effective as he was, given the hell that was heaped upon him. Because many of us cave in. Many of us capitulate, deuce out, drop out, punk out. It's amazing that this man was able to last. And ultimately, of course, it caused him to have many emotional problems. I think it was this unrelenting hammering that he was subjected to, that we all are. It was just more concentrated. So I think that we need to talk about that. What does it cost a man, a black man, to make this kind of stand? What happens in your personal life? I don't know how true this is, but Mrs. King is reported to have said when she heard that her husband was shot, she was reported to have said, now nobody can have him. Now, I wasn't there. This is rumor. But if it's true, it speaks volumes, about the pain that she suffered because she didn't have a husband. He was not only fighting wars with wrong, but he was fighting wars within himself, within his own cadre. It was a terrible. And so Paul Robeson's life, I think, is a monument to his strength and his ability to survive. And it's just a small wonder that it didn't happen sooner.
Yeah, and hearing you say that, I would have to say that it gives me another level of respect for Essie, because for whatever you can say about how they hooked up,
Mm-hmm.
In the long run, she did hang with him and helped him, in addition to doing her own stuff. So I have to give it to her on that level.
That's right.
Yeah.
But to interact, the interaction between black men and black women is very, very difficult to nourish in this environment. It is very difficult, especially if one or both of them are involved in struggle. And look down the list, of the warriors, and you'll see that there were major fractures in their personal life. Not because one was wrong and the other was not, or vice versa. It's because, I believe, of this pressure. And I think that Paul Robeson was a recipient of that. Imagine that you can be a star 1 minute and you be erased the next. You've got to take it. He's strong and he's macho and all of that, and I'm fine and I'm still Paul Robeson. But it's got to hurt. But he can't show that. It's got to stick in your esophagus and won't go down, but you can't say it to anybody. You got to be strong and loving and sure, I'm fine, old man River. What was happening to Paul? What did it do to his digestive system? We don't think about that.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. You wanted to ask me a question?
You researched and developed and produced 2 major specials on Robeson before anyone was thinking about him, knew about anything. Was there any cautionary stuff you got within the media establishment, any flack you received? Did you personally, we're talking media, you as a journalist, you took a risk to do it. That was some time ago. The McCarthy cloud was still over Robeson.
I'm not going to dodge your question, but I would say that doing the work that I do, especially stories like Paul Robeson's, was more a search for myself. Doing these stories helped me to understand me.
Me too.
I wasn't doing it because I wanted an award or something. I was finding out who I was. I was finding out what is right and what is wrong. Not in your personal shenanigans and stuff like that, but as a man, as a principled person. I was discovering that. I didn't know about that in my nurturing years. I didn't understand what my father and my mother had been through in trying to define themselves and the cost that it exacted on their personal lives. I didn't know. They didn't talk about that. Parents don't talk about that in the black community, as you know. And so as I got into this business and I found myself getting access to this story, not only of Malcolm X, but Paul Robeson, and on and on and on, and my career will speak for itself. I really did it to capture myself, to find out more about who I am and what I want to be. And that search continues. And the more I learn, the clearer I am about what I am. But I tell you, it's very painful. It is very painful. As you know.
Yeah, it is. That's
I mean, here you are, all these years, fighting to be the man that you have to be, and it's only lately that somebody came along and said, go with it, brother, and here's a couple of dollars to do that. You know, and it didn't come from Madison Avenue, it came from a brother.
Right.
You know, all of us. I mean, if you had wanted to be a certain other kind of filmmaker, no problem.
It's true.